Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is a brand new episode of Liam Picks Fights. And today on the show, we're talking about the main event of UFC Vegas 85. And of course, that means we're talking about a middleweight matchup between the Georgian Roman Dolidze and the Frenchman, if you want to say so, right? Otherwise known as the Russian sniper, Nassourdine Imavov. So this is a fascinating fight, guys. You've got two Caucasian warriors, so to speak, right? And on the one hand, you've got Roman Dolidze. He's known especially for his wrestling and his grappling. That's his bread and butter. You can think of a guy with the nickname Russian Sniper on the other side, Nassourdine Imavov. He's known particularly for his striking, but he's coming out of the MMA factory in France. So he has been working on rounding out his skill set. What we're going to do is we're going to break down this matchup in depth today on the show. You guys know the normal shows that we do on this channel. We do the first look. We come back to you with bets and banter, but this is a rare off week from the UFC. So I'm coming at you live after jiu-jitsu practice, and I'm ready to break down this fight, man. I've been doing some tape. If you guys haven't already, it's a great time to mention. Follow me on X, Twitter, whatever the hell you want to call it. That's fine by me, but you should follow me there because I really try and put out helpful informational content. I try not to just waste your time. I ask questions that I think are thought-provoking, but most of the time I'm just sharing, cogent information for MMA bettors. And when you look at this fight in particular, I've tried to share some really interesting tape on the Roman Dolidze side. And my goals for the rest of the night are to expand on that thread and then prepare a Nassourdine Imavov thread in terms of his tape study for tomorrow for people that are following me on that platform. So really easy way to get some more information is just to follow me there. But in any case, we could talk about some of my takeaways because I also have just been going through taking notes as I watch these matchups. I think that that's very helpful for my process. I have long-term, online notes and profiles for these fighters, but also I like to refresh myself. I like to just see what I pick up on. And I've been trying to approach it a little bit differently in terms of this week's, write-ups. I have a little bit more time on my hand. So what I've been doing is I've been going through and just putting plus and minus and then writing notes, right? So plus meaning it's a good thing. It's something I liked about what I saw on the tape. And the minuses are some things that are causes for concern, maybe some things where I'm going to want to look into that deeper. Hey, are there others examples of this on tape that could give me pause for backing a fighter? So want to give a shout out to the sharpest chat in the game. It's a little late here, just after 1 a.m. Eastern time, local time for me. And I'm excited to go. I got my coffee here. It's brewed up. I'm ready to rumble. So I appreciate everybody who's rocking with us live. But I also want to say, if you guys are catching this on the replay, appreciate you as well. If you guys want to, if you want to be so kind, go ahead and drop a like on the video. If you want to at the end, if you've enjoyed the content, go ahead and do that there as well. But make sure that you get subscribed if you enjoy content like this, because we're always talking about the fights, trying to put you in a position to succeed. Coming off a great event for us last time at that pay-per-view. Guys, in Canada, did we get every pick on the card right? No, we did not. But where it mattered, we did very well. Jillian Robertson cashed the plus 900 KO, as well as the KO2 plus 2,500. Just an absolute banner night. And hoping that we could keep the ball rolling when we get back to work on this fight night card. And so is it going to have the same fanfare? Is it going to have the same public attention? I don't expect it to, but I do think this is a hardcore fans matchup, right? You've got Nassourdine Imavov, a guy who is representing French MMA in a big way. He is a guy that has that Russian background. Like I said, I believe he's Dagestani by extraction. But when you look at what Imavov brings to the table, he is training out of the MMA factory in Paris. When he's fought in France before, the crowd goes absolutely ballistic for him. So it does seem like he's connecting in that way. Oftentimes, language is a big part of that. I think he's a multilingual speaker. I think he could speak French as well as Russian. So if that's the case, then it would make clear sense why he translates so well there. And he's also a main training partner of Ciryl Gane, who's translated as a heavyweight star in many ways in this division out of the same gym, MMA factory in Paris under Fernand Lopez. And when you look at Francis Ngannou, that's where he got his start as well. I got an itch on the back here, folks. Just got to scratch that as we move. Now, when you're looking at the Roman Dolidze side, he's a guy who's a little bit of a late bloomer in MMA, so to speak. He came to the game a little bit late. He had been doing his grappling work. He's 35 years of age, right? Compared to just 27 years of age on the Nassourdine Imavov side. However, he is a guy that does not have many MMA miles on his tank. You look, he's had 14 professional bouts despite being 35 years of age. Imavov technically fits a angle for me, which is a fighter with more professional experience. And, they're the younger fighter, right? So he's 27 years of age. He's significantly younger. He does have more professional experience. However, he's 12-4 in those bouts. So he has a worse winning record overall, a worse win percentage, I should say. And when you look at the Roman Dolidze side, what I think is really impressive is he does bring a nice Rolodex of grappling accomplishments, but also you just see how well his grappling translates to mixed martial arts. If you had to make a criticism oftentimes of jiu-jitsu players in MMA, certainly it's a criticism I would make, is that they don't often have the skills to punish people when they get them into dominant positions. And when you're going to leverage a lot of energy to get somebody to the ground, when you're going to spend that energy, you have to get a return on investment. And I think that normally comes in the form of ground and pound for elite fighters. So if you're Khabib Nurmagomedov, when you take somebody to the ground, you're going to take a lot out of them, not only by making them work, but also by hitting them, by touching them, by keeping them uncomfortable, by doing damage. And I think that a lot of guys lose sight of that. I think Roman Dolidze came to the UFC, and if you had to make a criticism, that was probably the biggest criticism, right? Number one would be overconfidence. Should I submit him now? He's like doing, some gimmicks, some stunts, some things that were a little bit egregious and hard to forgive. But also when you look at what else was happening in there, sometimes he was just getting a little bit stagnant. He'd get a hold of somebody, he'd be in the rear waist cinch. He'd just be leaning on him, pushing him against the fence, controlling him. But when you look at what Roman Dolidze has become, he kind of took a lot of criticism to heart. If you see, after he finishes somebody, he comes over to the announce booth and he lets them know what time it is. He tells them, hey, man, you said all that stuff about I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that. I don't have the hands, I don't have the power. And, he really let people know. He put them on notice. I thought that was impressive stuff. When you look at how he's been finishing these fights, I mean, guys, he's one of the last people in the UFC I'd want to fight. I'll tell you that. Vicious with his strikes, absolutely deadly from his back. And you look at these guys that are high level on the ground, they don't want any part of Roman Dolidze on the ground. They're realizing, how dangerous he is. And I think when you point to something like the Trevin Giles fight, that's a clear example of, hey, maybe it didn't translate in that fight. Maybe he got a little bit overconfident. But I really think a lot of the problem there was he was going for leg locks. He was trying to put himself into some of those situations that maybe work a little bit better, on the grappling circuit, but can cost you in MMA. And I remember I laughed about it at the time. I posted it, Trevin Giles out there just slapping him in the Ashigarami. It's absolutely hysterical, how he's countering that. But when you look, I think that had a little bit to do with fatigue as well. I think that might have been his first cut down to 185, if my memory serves. A lot of these things are just off the top of my head, guys. Like I said, I like to come to you guys later on in the process with ironed out research, every fact detailed down to the letter. But in this case, I'm coming to you guys early and I'm coming to you guys raw and real, just right off my paper. And so I didn't do every bit of due diligence, but I'm a pretty astute fight fan. I'm pretty sure that was his first trip down to 185. If I'm wrong, it was one of his first trips down to the weight class. I think we've seen a much better version physically of Roman Dolidze. He's been training at Extreme Couture, and he looks to be a guy who's extremely aggressive in all positions. If I had to summarize his game, let's again refer to that tweet that I was mentioning. And I'm not, Mr. Refer to Twitter, but in this case, I spent a lot of time, effort, and energy putting that thread together, and I really tried to summarize my thoughts. So I think it's a great starting point for this conversation because I spent a lot of time, effort, and energy putting these thoughts together. So first and foremost, what does he bring to the table? Why is Roman Dolidze a threat despite being 35 years of age? Number one, he's a southpaw. I listed him on my tweet as a particularly Georgian southpaw. Why do I mention that? Because the Georgians that have come to the UFC, are just guys that are willing to go out there, put on it's exciting, crazy brawls, get in somebody's face, throw like mad, and really get into a war. They seem to be quite durable overall. And so I just look at that and I say, man, this guy fits the bill of a lot of those other fighters in terms of the toughness, the durability, the willingness to come forward, the aggression. But then let's talk about the southpaw nature. I actually saw that Joaquin Buckley, New Mansa, not a very big fighter, was getting through with his left hand. He would switch to southpaw. He'd find the left hand on Nassourdine Imavov when they were fighting in Paddy. And when I was looking at that, I was thinking to myself, man, this is a real spot where you could see Roman Dolidze having success with that left hand that he does tend to favor. He's not a guy that's prolific with his jab. I would say that the jabbing battle in this fight will go to Nassourdine Imavov. He's the more willing jabber. He's the more frequent jabber. And often he'll double and triple up those attacks as well. That's something that really made a difference in that fight with Buckley. Buckley did not have the tools or the size to cover distance. And so oftentimes he found himself trying to blitz from far away, trying to, rush in and try and throw 6, 7, 8-piece combinations that were taxing him on the cardio. But the biggest thing that stands out to me about Imavov in terms of how he's going to interact with Roman Dolidze's game is that a lot of times he likes to try and get on top of his opponents. So now let's go back to this tweet. I said, Roman Dolidze is a Georgian southpaw. He's got power in both hands. And we've seen that in a number of fights now, going out there, getting ground and pound stoppages with the TKO, disrupting people's rhythm and hurting them with the elbows from the bottom. I think that he had Phil Hawes hurt before he ever went for that leg lock entry. You guys can go rewatch the film, see if you agree or disagree. But I think those elbows to the top of the head really pay dividends for him. He's very aggressive from his back in more ways than one. He doesn't just go to town attacking with the elbows. He goes to town attacking with the elbows, then turns that into an underhook, then swivels the hips in both directions, then uses that to off-balance the opponent and either create a sweep, create a submission attempt, off-balance, create a leg lock entry, or create space to stand back up to his feet, create space to regard. So you see a very clever, developed deep guard game from Roman Dolidze. That's a very special and important part of what he does. And he's an intricate submission threat. Let's not make any mistake about that fact. When you look at the Phil Hawes fight, guys, he goes from that armbar series that I described, right? Swivel the hips, attempt the armbar. He puts a lot of guys in danger with that armbar series. But what he's always doing is thinking, what is next? What is the next thing that I could do to threaten? So he briefly pretends almost in some of these exchanges, like, hey, I'm going to go for a gogo plata. I'm going to go for an omoplata. I'm going to sit to one of these weird different moves. And then what he ends up doing instead is inverting his body. He grabs two hands underneath, pulls himself closer to the leg, and you see brilliant finishing mechanics. Also, you just see a variety of attacks. He inverted to the leg, goes for a triangle choke, doesn't get it, no problem, pops the head out. So then he goes right to the leg. And guys, his leg locks are disgusting, right? So if you're really astute, if you've been in there, drilling a lot of leg locks, if you've been in there with a lot of high-level grapplers, then yeah, maybe you'll be able to deal with, some of those attacks. But let's not pretend Jack Hermansson's not a black belt, right? Sometimes physical strength gives him problems, but we don't normally see him summarily out-grappled. In fact, we've seen multiple occasions where Jack Hermansson has submitted high-level black belts in the UFC, including David Branch, who's a local instructor, local legend, BJJ black belt in the area. Like, this is a guy that's very serious about his jiu-jitsu. He's gone to the John Danaher seminars and then hit the seated katakatami how many times in the UFC. So there's a lot to like about this guy. But I'm saying when I look at how Roman Dolidze treated him, he looked like he was 2 levels above him in the grappling. He looked like he was 10 steps ahead in every grappling exchange that they had. And I think that that's a sign that Roman Dolidze is going to have a clear grappling advantage over Nassourdine Imavov. Now, when you look at Imavov, he is a guy that definitely is improving over time. Under the tutelage of Fernando Lopez, you expect that he's going to continue to get better, and you expect that he's going to continue to work on that sprawl game. But my problem, my issue with what I've seen from his work on tape is that he would get touched by Buckley. Buckley, like I said, struggled to cover the distance, but when he would cover the distance, he would land some serious shots at times. And when you're looking at, a guy like Buckley, he definitely has skills, but he's limited. He's got a limited frame. He's certainly undersized for the division. All that's fair to say. And so when he's going out there and getting to hips, easily getting to hips, he just wasn't able to get takedowns, right? He's not a very prolific wrestler. He's not very sound in those positions. And I think that when you watch Nassourdine Imavov, he's kind of gotten bailed out at times by his opponents not having great game plans. When you look at Buckley, every time he wanted to in that fight, he pushed him up against the fence. He was able to push him up against the fence and hold on to him for a few seconds, but then he would not be consistent enough with that forward pressure. I think that, Roman Dolidze, he's all about the forward pressure. He's all about stalking you, walking you down. I do think that Imavov is going to be the faster athlete. I think he's going to have a foot speed advantage. Shout out to my guy, Pepe Sylvia as well. I was speaking to him about the fight. He mentioned the speed of Nassourdine Imavov being a potential factor. And I do think that is something, to consider here. Roman Dolidze, a little bit older. What are some of the things that tend to go with age? Just maybe that speed, maybe some of that reaction time. So I think if you're trying to map out what are the paths to victory, let's say for each athlete, I think Roman Dolidze is live to win by every method. And I think that for Nassourdine Imavov, he would have to finish, I would think, either with a flash knockout or he would have to finish later on in the fight somehow, gas him out, get him tired. Because I just think of Roman Dolidze as a guy who's very difficult to make quit, who's very difficult to dissuade, and also very difficult to hurt. So if all those factors are there, then I think the question is, what is Imavov going to do to manage his cardio better than the last time that he was in a 5-round fight? How is he going to deal with somebody trying to push him against the fence in the small octagon in Vegas when he's struggled with that historically, including the Phil Hawes fight? I think that those are all relevant questions that we've got to consider here. So we're just scratching the surface. There's still plenty more to dig into. We're going to go match by match for a couple of these recent fights, but I got to take a sip of the coffee and give a shout out to the chat. So we're going to see what the chat has to say, and then we're going to get right back into the action. Awesome. So let's see what you guys have to say. Sharpest chat in the game. Want to make sure that you guys are included. Curtis in the building says, Liam, what's up, Curtis? How are you? Gray, Patreon member, shout out to Gray, says, shout out to Gray for the Blues winner, by the way. St. Louis Blues cashed that money line ticket. I was taping fights of his earlier, but got distracted by hockey. My man only made it in first of his 3 in the UFC. Third fight was Giles. So far, I'm reminded that his fight IQ is a little low. I do think it's coming along with the great Eric Nixick and the leadership at Extreme Couture, but that is something that I noted early on in his career as well. For a guy who came to the UFC a little bit older, maybe lacked some of that maturity inside the octagon, I do think he's gotten a lot more mature, a lot more serious, and a lot more aggressive over his recent run, but it is something to be cognizant of moving forward. So great point there, Gray. Thank you so much for pointing that out. Now, let's see what Fubu has to say. He says, Chris Curtis had a lot of trouble finding Imavov. I mean, Chris Curtis, I did not think looked sensational against Marc-Andre Barrios, who tends to be very hittable in his fights. So I just don't know that Chris Curtis is the same aggressive party. He tends to be a counter puncher. He tends to be a little bit back foot oriented. And Imavov likes to do a little bit of that as well. Like I said, he pops out the jab. He likes to work behind multiple jabs and sometimes that front kick as well. But he's susceptible to low kicks. In my opinion, both of these guys are quite susceptible to low kicks if you had to make a negative comment about them as well. So I think that that's something that we got to be cognizant of is both these guys maybe have defensive flaws. But the other thing I will note, if I had to criticize Roman Dolidze and compare him to Nassourdine Imavov, maybe one of the other subtle differences is Imavov mixes up his offense a little bit more. Is he the most varied striker I've ever seen? No. He does like to be jab heavy. He does like to be pretty simple with the 1-2. He does like to throw some of those front kicks up the middle, and he likes to throw some of his own low kicks, but he's not the most diverse striker of all time. But when you look at Roman Dolidze, it's like his striking changes with every opponent. So I guess that's a good thing and a bad thing, but in his fight against Marvin Vettori, I thought the notable absence was the kicks. Just a complete lack of kicks to diversify his game. And Marvin was doing a lot of running away, right? And he was circling, he was backing up, and he was pot shotting. He was throwing a couple and then moving. So I just felt like Roman would have done a lot better in that fight. Had he controlled the space a little bit more. And when you look at how you control space in the UFC, you got to throw some kicks. You got to manage that distance. You got to force people to stay within a certain range. And I think that we've seen him throw kicks, right? It's not like he's incapable. We've seen him throw high kicks. We've seen him throw body kicks. He just doesn't seem to like throwing them very often because a lot of his offense he commits to full force. And when you're throwing punches, I think he can manage that from an energy standpoint a lot better than throwing kicks. So I just think that that might be a part of, his shot selection. But I'd like to see him throw some low kicks in this fight. I think especially that would be smart. I think he could potentially score with high kicks in this fight. Again, looking at that Buckley fight, Buckley's tiny, right? Buckley is like my height, and he's out there landing high kicks on Nassourdine Imavov, a much taller man, onto the arms, of course. Dolidze is a big guy, and I don't think that Imavov is very good at blocking head kicks in particular because his hands tend to be quite low. He does a lot of that, hanging the chin out there and show just the one hand type deal. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? He makes it work. He's pretty defensively responsible by and large. But when it comes to blocking high kicks, there can be some value to having a high guard. If my hands are already up here, two together, right? Putting two forearms together to block the kick, probably going to give you a better chance of not breaking all your shit and hurting your head than if you're just, trying to block it with one hand with a parry after your other hand's completely down by your waist. So again, just some notes about the stance matchup, how it's going to look here. We do have the typical southpaw look from Dolidze, and I believe an orthodox stance for his opponent here. So let's pull up the UFC stats page. I've got my Tapology going. I got the BetMMA.tips going. So you know that we've got plenty more information to break down. We'll go over some trends for you guys as well. Try and put you guys in a position to succeed no matter which side you're on. We're always going to talk, through each and every one of our angles and our positions and hope to find the best of it. Now, I just want to say a couple more shout outs to the viewers' comments right now. We've got Nate Brown says, it's getting late. I'll be back for the replay with a $2 dono. Start the dono train. Thank you so much, Nate, on the replay, my man. Hope that you see this. And hope it makes you smile. Appreciate you being here, brother, and hope that you learned something along the way. As always, my man, I'm always learning from you as well. He says he thinks that Imavov has made the improvements, but it is a very volatile matchup. Couldn't agree more. That is what we're seeing in the middleweight division, right? A lot of volatility, even that title belt bouncing around everywhere. Shout out to Gold Cap, says the late show with Liam. Hey, cheers to you, Gold Caps. Indeed. Shout out to my guy, MMA Line Mover, friend of the show, back in the building, and Jeff Bruno as well. He's doing the dancing emoji. We're dancing here, having a great night. Shout out to you for being here. Matt says Dolidze is his pick for this next one. I appreciate all the other picks, Matt, but we will go over those on the First Look show. So please go ahead and drop those in the comments, and I will make sure we can go over those on that show. As for Justin, he dabs into the building, says, greetings from Mount Rushmore. Hey, cheers to you, brother. I'll drink to a Mount Rushmore. And MMA Line Mover says, so you're telling me Pete Rodriguez by sub is the play. My man is smoking the greatest indica that there's ever been. Shout out to him. Shout out to Matt R, Line Mover, Dober, sub is the play. Man, you guys are all over the board on this one. I love it. Bo Jackson says 297 was fire. Hey, brother. It wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. I'll tell you, that main event was fire to me, brother. Spartacus MMA says, what's up, bro? What's up, Spartacus? Welcome back. Appreciate all you guys for being here. So I think that we've now hit everybody in the chat, and our guy Cheshire says he's on the chill vibe now. I don't troll people. Hey, we can all turn over a new leaf. So welcome back, my man. And the Becca 01, I think that's it. Correct me if I'm wrong. The Becca 01 says, hate weeks off. Love the early videos. Hey, appreciate you being here. It's always my pleasure to talk about these fights. I've been doing a lot of thinking about this fight in particular. So I always try and make sure I don't come to you guys with nothing, right? I don't come to you guys with BS, but I try and come to you guys when I really have given some thought and I have something to offer, right? Or I have some trends that I've identified. I really try and just make sure that there's a value add. I don't want to waste your time when you guys are here. But I also appreciate just kicking it with you guys that are fight fans, just like myself, and what better way to spend a late night than trying to get an edge on these early fights, right? Because this is a fight where we do have some betting odds that are already out. Let's pull those up right now as we speak. So we'll go to bestfightodds.com, but I can tell you guys, I've been monitoring this line. I always keep an eye on the early betting odds. I will just say, Patreon members are aware we do have 2 positions locked in, some of them, months in advance now. But I don't always fire early on lines. I tend to be an underdog better. I tend to like to wait for late market opportunities when underdog prices typically peak, but sometimes you see lines moving. So you want to get involved before they go, to an unplayable price range. And so for me, if it's a good bet at a number, I got to take it. I can always add, I can reevaluate, change my positions in the future based on new numbers, based on new information. But for me, excited about a couple early plays getting locked in. As for this fight, though, it is a fight I've been monitoring very closely because we have seen some movement. I believe it was plus 130 best available, just a few days ago. Now you're seeing plus 140s painting the board, plus 142 on DraftKings Sportsbook. Right now, the best available, according to bestfightodds.com. I know that in New York, you could do slightly better than that, but not by much. I think in New Jersey, you could do as good as plus 145. And I'm going to pull up fightodds.io as well because BetOnline was shopping plus 145 earlier today on Roman Dolidze. And now they are back down to plus 139. So a little bit of action came in, about 6 cents worth of movement back in the direction of Roman Dolidze on BetOnline, one of the sharpest sports books in the world. So there's been a tug of war on this line. That is the bottom line in this fight. And I do think that there's going to be sharp money on both sides. When you look at this fight, you could clearly define an edge for the Roman Dolidze side, which would be, hey, this guy's really dangerous. He goes out there and he's got the submission edge, in my humble opinion, by a significant degree. I think that he's probably as powerful as a guy like Nassourdine Imavov, and you could argue that he's more durable. So if that's the case, if his cardio is going to check out a little bit better than Imavov, a guy who's really struggled in some of these third rounds, you could definitely make a colorable case for Roman Dolidze. And like I mentioned, he's an underdog in this matchup. That could be very tempting. Now, on the Nassourdine Imavov side, why are sharp people going to get to the window laying chalk? They're saying, man, I'm betting into a massive age advantage, right? I got the much more youthful fighter on my side in Nassourdine Imavov. He's also going to have 1 inch in height here, 27 years of age, almost 28, compared to 35 and a hook for Roman Dolidze. So obviously Dolidze is the much older fighter in this spot, but he is fighting at home, right? He doesn't have to fly in from France or Russia, Dagestan, right? I'm just messing around a little bit there, but he doesn't have to fly in from France, right? He's training in Vegas, right? He's been posting at Extreme Couture. As far as I know, he's definitely been posting from Las Vegas. So I think that he's a guy that has been making serious improvements. I think he's been taking his career pretty seriously. And you can tell when he goes back to Georgia, it's not all fun and games. It's not all sitting on the couch playing video games and, eating this and that and junk food. No, he's a guy that's out there training seriously. He looked like he was wrestling with some Georgian wrestling legends while he was out there. So it seemed like he was taking his craft quite seriously. And I look at the fight, with Buckley, and I just say to myself, man, I think Roman Dolidze can get takedowns if he wants to get takedowns in this fight. I also think that, the takedowns that Imavov normally gets, I think he's going to get him here if he wants them because Dolidze doesn't defend takedowns. I don't know if you guys watch these fights, with the same eye that I was looking at it, but I'm telling you, in my humble opinion, Roman Dolidze is not interested in defending takedowns 9 out of 10 times. He's more than happy to get taken down and start firing elbows off his back, looking for the guard, looking for a leg entanglement, looking for an underhook, and he's really difficult to deal with in those spots. So I think that that's all going to play into his favor, right? If Imavov wants to bail himself out by trying to shoot some of those takedowns that he normally does, I don't think that's going to be to his benefit, right? I think that could actually play to his detriment in this fight. So I think that Imavov's a talented guy. I've always thought that. I put out a tweet several years ago, and I did repost it, with the caption, is Imavov finally going to break out? I had said, pick a guy, or girl from the top 10 to 15 in the weight class that can be a dark horse in the division. And, at 185, one of the guys I came up with was Imavov. And this was, I think, 2022. So when you look at that time, I was just saying this is a guy that did have some of the skills necessary. But frankly, if I'm his manager, right, if I'm matchmaking for him, I would have said no to this fight, right? The Sean Strickland fight, frankly, I thought he was going to win. Why did I think he was going to win it? Because at the time, we saw Imavov coming in there. He should have had a lot of confidence. He was preparing for the date. Sean Strickland, I believe, was on short notice. And they moved it up to like a 195-pound catch weight. Again, he looks like the bigger guy physically, but then he's in there with Sean Strickland, getting bullied around physically, not looking like he's got the strength to compete with him and not looking like he has the cardio to compete with him either. Sean is like a guy who enjoys hurting people. So he's out there for 25 minutes, just poking and prodding and never really trying to put a stamp on it or finish. But at the time, I thought that, Strickland was a guy that was coming off of tough losses, had been in a lot of fights where he's getting his bell rung, getting into tough spots. And I thought that maybe Imavov could get to his chin, but Imavov just didn't impress me in that fight. And he hasn't really impressed me in subsequent bouts either. That Buckley fight, frankly, without Buckley making a couple critical errors, it's a lot closer of a fight. Buckley falls flat to his back with 20 seconds left in the first round, gives up the mount. Just terrible look there. Gave up a takedown late in the second round. In the third round, he was out there, beating him up a little bit, landing some clean shots. And I just think that was a bad look. Obviously there could have been an adrenaline dump there. He's fighting at home. He's looking for the finish. A lot of emotion goes into that one. But I just think of a guy like Roman Dolidze, and I say, man, I would if you said, Liam, you got to fight one of these guys, man. One of these guys, you got to fight him. I would pick Nassourdine Imavov, right? And he would kick my ass, right? Both these guys would absolutely kick my ass. But that's one way that I could decide, how I'm betting these fights, right? It's like if I had to fight for my life, you were putting me, hey, Liam, you got to fight for this. I don't want to get in there with Roman Dolidze, bro. That guy seems way too serious, seems way too mean, way too aggressive. The way he knocked out Phil Hawes, absolute brutality. And he was a gentleman. You look at that fight, Big Dan did it, Phil no favors Hawes, bro. I've been saying it, and it's been more and more true fight after fight. But you look, they're doing him no favors. Big Dan sees him get his knee just completely torn. He's like, stand back up, Phil. Come on, you got this. And literally, he's like leaning against the fence, can hardly stand up, and just gets brutally knocked out. But you look at Roman Dolidze, and he was patient, but he was murderous in that fight. He picked his spots. He knew exactly where he had his opponent, and he treated him like prey. He walked him down. It was a brutal fight, man. And this guy, Roman Dolidze, is a killer. I do think that he is a tough guy for anybody at 185 to deal with right now. I think his confidence is growing. Frankly, I thought he beat Marvin Vettori. Didn't bet that fight. 2-0 betting on Roman Dolidze fights. I bet him, I believe, chalk both iterations earlier on in his UFC career. And he went out there and put on boring wrestling clinics and whatever, and I was happy with it at the time. But now he's actually transformed me into not only a guy who's willing to look at him from a betting consideration, but also I'm a fan. I really enjoy his work. I think that when you're trying to study people who grapple in mixed martial arts, I think Roman Dolidze has got to be on your list because the way that he was able to transition to that calf slicer, the belly down calf slicer TKO over Jack Hermanson, that's got to be like a creativity award. That's just so phenomenal and rare and creative and unique. And the way that he got it was special. And the way that he controlled it was special. Everything about it was special. And I think that Roman Dolidze might be special as well. So that's what's standing out to me. Let's go fight by fight through my notes as well. I got 4 fights that I broke down here in detail. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just walk through these, right? I have even more notes that I have on Patreon. I'm actually going to take this picture, like a picture of this, and just upload it directly on Patreon as well. And I'll probably sometime next week just upload this for all the homies as well on Twitter, but like to give the patrons first access there. But when you look, we're just going to talk about some of my notes here. So the first fight that we'll talk about is Roman Dolidze and Marvin Vettori. And the first fight, scoring notes, I've got Roman Dolidze in round 1. I've got round 2 for Marvin Vettori. And I have round 3 as the pivot round. I think that was the closest round. And I have Dolidze by a hair in that fight. I thought it was super close, but I just thought he did a little bit better job landing with impact, landing the shots that matter, pursuing the fight, walking him down, being aggressive. He just seemed like the guy who deserved the win in that spot, albeit very close in the end. But here's the positives and the negatives that I took away from Roman Dolidze in that fight. Positives: power, aggression, forward pressure. A lot of the things I mentioned in my breakdown, very evident in this fight. A couple of the negatives that I mentioned: bit rigid, a bit stiff, sometimes a little bit upright, kind of walks you down with the shoulders up. And so he's going to be there to be hit at times in his career. You got to rely more on the durability and, that willingness to take some damage, as opposed to this guy's a defensive savant. He's never going to get hit. That's just not realistic with a guy who's 35 years of age and a primary wrestler and grappler. But it is worth noting, he's also susceptible to low kicks. I think this is a criticism. Like I said, you can make of both guys, but evident in this fight, he was taking a lot of low kicks against Vettori. It was a discerning kicking performance from Marvin Vettori. That was what made the difference for him on the judges' scorecards. But I thought that the better work was actually done by Dolidze. Next up, we'll talk about Roman Dolidze against Phil No Hype Hawes. And this is a fight where I noted how impressive it was to me. I noted how that finish was sensational. The plus: throws head kicks into the open stance of Hawes. Like I said, he's a guy that varies his offense. Against Marvin Vettori, could have used a couple head kicks, my brother. But he did use the head kicks against Phil Hawes to just keep him honest, right? Prevent Phil from taking any easy takedown attempts early. He just threw a couple high kicks, kept him honest, kept him on the back foot, and was able to score a little bit with his offense. Aggressive from bottom position with elbows, created space and damage quickly. That's important. You don't want to get stuck flat on your back with somebody heavy on top of you at 185 pounds. But what I love about Dolidze's game is he will either turn himself onto a hip and start to create space to enter on a leg, or he will turn himself onto a hip and start to create space to re-guard, get back to the full guard. And from full guard, he's very violent. He's very dangerous. Nobody wants to stay on top of this guy. But even exiting his guard is a liability, because in order to exit, you have to stand up. And in order to stand up, you have to expose your legs. So I'm telling you guys, if you go back and watch, Dolidze, like clockwork, attacks the arm. And if you try and pull it out, he attacks the leg. There's just there's no free lunch against this guy, right? Like, you're just going to have a good defense for everything, or he's going to put you through the ringer and he's going to audit your grappling game, whether you're a black belt or not. But back to it, it was all plus signs for me in this Phil Hawes fight. Good finishing instincts. He hurt his man. He finished him with the hands, right? So the referee doesn't do his job, right? It reminds me of in college, if I was running laps, right? Sometimes our coach would say, hey, all right, you got 6 laps, and you go run, you finish the 6 laps and you go, ref screwed you, right? And that means you got to go run more laps, right? In this case, ref screwed you. Phil Hawes clearly injured. Roman Dolidze tries to be a gentleman, stands up, hey, hands off. I don't want to hit him anymore. His legs clearly messed up. He tries to stand up. He stumbles into the fence. Big Dan does him no favors. And then he's like, okay, you know what? I wanted to do it the right way. I wanted to be a gentleman. I wanted to be a sportsman. Can't be that way. He went right back to fighter mode. I like that. If I'm going to part ways with my money, if I'm going to bet on you, I need you to be ready to go, right? Like Luke Thomas used to say, a willingness to answer the call to violence. That's a real thing. If you look at the downfall of Rory McDonald, one of my favorite fighters of all time, he's on that poster right there, right? But you look at the downfall of Rory McDonald, it was directly tied to a loss of willingness to go produce violence. He loved it when he was young. He loved it on his way up. And he got in a couple wars that changed him forever. And he did not have that same answer of the call to violence. But this guy, Roman Dolidze, answers the call to violence. It doesn't matter that he's 35 years of age. He wants that ruckus. He wants to get in there and scrap. He is not afraid to get punched in the face because he wants to give you one right back. And for me, that was what it showed in that Phil Hawes fight. He said, okay, it's time to turn on the aggression once again. And he walked him down and knocked him out brutally, probably changed his life and career. And there's nothing nice about it. But it was brutal and it was efficient, and that was good fighting. So I was impressed with what I saw there. Now, we'll move to the Jack Hermansson fight, and this will be our last point of discussion so far for Roman Dolidze. We'll revisit him again in the future, and we'll do a little bit more tape on him at that time. But Roman Dolidze against Jack Hermansson, let's talk about why this was such a great fight. The downsides, right? We'll talk about the downsides first and where Jack was having success in this fight. Super susceptible to the low kicks against Jack Hermansson. You know, we've seen Jack has punished other middleweights. He moves in, he moves out, he throws the leg kicks, he gets on his bike, and he's difficult for guys to deal with because of that. However, like a Nassourdine Imavov, he's a guy that really likes his takedowns. You know, he really likes to have his game flowing through multiple phases. He doesn't want to be stuck on the feet with anybody, right? Primarily, right? If he's stuck on the feet with somebody, it's because he feels safe. It's because he feels like he could just run away the whole time, and he doesn't feel like there's that much of a risk. But most of the time, Jack likes to take people down. He likes to be on top. And that's because it's a risk mitigation strategy. Plus, he can be dominant. He can be aggressive. He can open up with his offense. He can feel confident once he gets somebody down to the ground. But when you look at that fight, the dynamic guard, man, the sweep attempt in this fight, instantly he gets taken down to the ground. He goes for that same armbar series that I talked about. But instead of going for the armbar to the leg lock to the this, that, the other, he was like, I'm getting right back up to my feet. And he goes underhook, sweep attempt. And if it wasn't a black belt, guys, that is absolutely a sweep. Jack did a great job getting tall, getting strong, building back up. And Roman just got 2 feet on the ground. Man, that was fantastic. That's something that, frankly, I do all the time. You know, like it's a great way to create some space and wrestle back up to the feet. So I just really was impressed with a lot of what Roman Dolidze had to offer. I try and replicate the same kind of things in my own game. Now, obviously, I'm not as prolific with that underhook and that armbar series, but I'm just talking about the way that he used that sweep attempt, right? Like trying to be super dynamic with that sweep attempt to get right back up to 2 feet on the ground. Now we're wrestling again. We're not doing jiu-jitsu anymore. We're wrestling again. And I think that for a guy like Dolidze, who is strong in both the wrestling and the grappling phases, I think that that's something to be really cognizant of. He can take people from a phase to another phase quickly, and he can just switch it up on people with those leg lock entries, with those arm lock entries, with the sweep attempts. He is happy to take a lot of different positions. He's happy to take a lot of different attacks. And when I said that he doesn't maybe have the same variety on the feet, he has a tremendous amount of variety on the ground, and much more, I would argue, than a Nassourdine Imavov. I think Imavov's got a pretty good front headlock series, and I think he's got a pretty decent takedown. That's about it for me, though. I don't think he's very deep in his grappling. I think that there's some room for improvement. I think there's a little fat on his game. So for me, Roman Dolidze is just a much more clean, dangerous grappler with more sophistication and more options. So if I'm Imavov, the floor is lava, brother. I'm trying to keep the fight away from there. I'm trying to stuff takedowns. I'm trying not to get taken to the ground with this guy, because I'm telling you, Roman Dolidze is a really creative, savvy operator. Unless he's exhausted on the ground, he's going to offer you a lot that's going to make you uncomfortable. He can cut you with those elbows from the bottom. He can off balance you. He can sweep you. He can submit you. He can invert. He can leg lock. You know, it's just like there's a lot. You gotta have every T crossed, every I dotted to beat a guy like Roman Dolidze on the ground. And Trevin Giles showed up. Hey, he had the night of his life. He put on a great performance. I'll tell you, though, you look through Trevin Giles' record. Yes, he's been submitted a number of times in his career. I can't deny that. He's not a bad grappler, though. He's a guy that makes some questionable decisions at times in fights, but basically he's been guillotined, I think, 3 or 4 times, mostly by high-level operators, I think all by black belts, and mostly late in the fight, and one time by a guy who's like a front-loaded fighter, submitted him right away early in the fight, Bonfim I'm talking about. So I don't think that Giles is like a terrible grappler or something. I think he's very good, and I also don't think he's a quitter. I just think that he gets caught in some bad positions at times, making boneheaded mistakes. I think that against Roman Dolidze, he fought a great fight, and I'm not going to punish Dolidze for that. You know, he's produced as an underdog. Let's talk about the betting trends here as well, because I think that that's a fascinating way to look at these fights. Both of these guys have been producers, you know. Let's look at Nassourdine Imavov. first because his page came up first. So as a favorite, he's 2-1 over his record in the UFC for a 9.7% return on your investment. As for his underdog betting odds, he was an average odds of plus 117, 2-1 in that odds range, and he had a 48.3% return on investment. So that would overall make him 4-2 in his UFC run for a 28.9 or a 29% roughly ROI. So not a bad return on investment for the Dolidze side, or about 29% return on your investment. So he's been a profitable fighter to back in his UFC run, done a good job, gone out there and produced a above, replacement win rate. So he's done everything that's expected of him. Now, as for Dolidze, a little bit more UFC experience on that side, 6-2 in the promotion. And as a favorite, he's done very well, 3-1 for a 24% ROI. And the fight that he lost as a favorite was the aforementioned matchup against Trevin Giles. Then you look at the fight he lost against Marvin Vettori. He closed as a pretty significant underdog in that matchup, and it was a very close decision. Like I said, I thought it could have went his way. He's actually 3-1 as an underdog for an over 100% ROI. So this is a guy that has produced in the UFC, 6-2 overall, 74.3% ROI as a UFC product. That's very impressive numbers. And I think that when you look at these Georgian guys, they've come in and done a great job, man. And a lot of times they've been undervalued. You look at a Guram Kutateladze, he kind of flips that on its head. He's like minus 600 or whatever and loses. But a lot of these guys, they've been reasonably priced and sometimes underdogs in their UFC career and just gone out there and produced like they were favorites a lot of the time. So it just seems to me like a dog or pass situation from a gut level feel. And I also think that, I'll be anxious to see what the props look like on a fight like this, because I do think there's a lot of different ways that this fight could end. So if you get really significant plus money, maybe that's just the way that you go, and you hope that it leans that way. But I think that Dolidze is just too dangerous everywhere. I don't know where's a safe zone for Imavov in this fight, except for just outside of range, throwing his teeps, getting out of the space, throwing low kicks, touching with the jab, and being really smart and diligent over, 3 to 5 rounds. And I think that we don't have evidence that he's got the cardio to do that. And I think that we don't have enough evidence that he's just this one-hitter quitter with the power to go out there and knock out a guy like Dolidze, who's tough and strong and durable. So for me, feels like Dolidze is going to be able to go out there and really compete in this fight, go out there and really make it an honest scrap, an honest effort. And at a plus 145 tag, I think that might end up looking pretty good. Jeff says Dolidze ITD, decision, no action. I think that people might be underrating his decision equity here. When you look at a guy like Dolidze, he has a set of skills that are at times boring, right? Like I said, he wasn't always considered the, next great finisher in the middleweight ranks, but could he push you against the cage and, hold you there? Yes, he could. And could he do that to Nassourdine Imavov, who got held against the fence by Phil Hawes? I mean, I think that's absolutely plausible. When you look at the Nassourdine Imavov side, he's been held against the fence by a number of guys. Let's look at the UFC stats and make sure that we're not talking out of our tuchus here. But against Chris Curtis and Sean Strickland, you'd think there'd be very little control time. However, Sean Strickland did land the only takedown of that matchup and registered 4 minutes and 12 seconds of control time. So Sean Strickland, typically a stand-at-distance boxer, was able to take him down and get 4 minutes of control time in that fight. Joaquin Buckley was able to get just 30 seconds of control time. He was stuffed on 3 takedown attempts, but Imavov only secured 2 of 7 takedown attempts for 3 minutes and 56 seconds of control time. And like I mentioned, one of them kind of looked like a slip to me, where he just falls back and then ends up getting mounted late in the round. The Edmund Shabazian fight, I mean, Edmund, frankly, is a huge gasser, and Edmund gassed out in that spot, getting the only takedown of the fight, 2 minutes and 34 seconds of control time. And I predicted that he would get finished in that spot. So there was no surprise to me there. Edmund just does not have the cardio to go. And I think that, Nassourdine doesn't have great cardio, but it's way better than Edmund. Then you look at Nassourdine Imavov against Ian Heinisch, and Ian Heinisch not a great fighter for the UFC level. No disrespect to the man. He's a fine fighter, but just very average in most categories. I don't think he's very above average in any category except maybe power. Certainly his win record wasn't above a replacement rate, and I don't think he's with the company any longer. But in any case, Ian Heinisch did have 1 minute of control time registered in that fight against Nassourdine Imavov, going 0 for 3 on takedown attempts and getting finished in the second round. Phil Hawes, this is the fight of substance, guys. 11 out of 15 minutes spent in control time positions favoring Phil Hawes. What was that? Holding him against the fence. So if you think that Roman Dolidze can't take this guy and press his back against the fence and hold him to the orchestra of boos that is surely to await him if he does, I think he absolutely could do that for 5 rounds. And I think that Nassourdine would probably get more tired than Roman over the course of those 5 rounds, if that's how they're fighting. So for me, this is just a great fight, a fun fight, an interesting fight, a fight that will require a little bit more nuance. But, I'm certainly waiting to see what this line peaks out at, because right now it appears to be, moving up towards the Dolidze side. Obviously, some money's coming in on Imavov, and I respect it, right? I know sharp guys that have bet Imavov, and I get their takes. But for me, I always got to trust my gut. I got to trust my instincts. And for me, my instincts say it's a dog or pass situation. So that's the way I'm going to approach it. And I think that if I get involved, I'll probably be on the underdog. But I have no plans right now to bet on this fight, because I still have to do a little bit more tape study on Nassourdine Imavov. So want to remind you guys one last time, if you haven't already, make sure you follow me on X. If you haven't already, make sure you get subscribed to the channel, because we're always here talking about fights. I have an idea that I want to run by you guys. So all the lucky 28 people that are here with us live, y'all can just let me know, in the chat right now what you think. But also, if you have extra comments, thoughts, ideas, suggestions, go ahead and fire those off in the comment section below the video. I always try and read those, react to those, respond to those, and I appreciate each and every one of them. But what I wanted to say, guys, was February, shortest month of the year. I'm thinking about going live every day in the month of February to talk about one fight at a time, to talk about betting odds, to talk about concepts. Make sure that I'm providing a lot of content, because January has been a little bit slow for the UFC. We haven't had as much to talk about, but now we've got fight announcements. We've got UFC 300 on the horizon. We've got UFC 299. Looks like UFC 300 Part 1. We've got a lot of great fights coming up. We've got PFL versus Bellator, all this shit on the horizon. So if you guys would be down, I would be down to go live every day. And if I'm going to do it, I'm going to make sure I have a plan. I'm not just coming, hat in hand. Hey, what should we talk about today? It'll be planned out. Hey, this is what I'm going to be talking about today. I'll probably go week by week with the planning for that. But if that's something you guys would be interested in, go ahead and fire that off on the comment section below. The Becca is already saying that we should do it. I think that it's a great idea. I think it'd be a lot of fun, and I think that we could make some magic together. So if you guys agree, go ahead and fire that off in the comment section below. But last but not least, we've got the podcast, guys. I do put up these shows that we do on YouTube together on podcast. They're ad-free. I try and make it, accessible for you guys in that way, and trying to keep building that up. So if you guys enjoy that, if you guys like the audio, if that's something that you're digesting, please let me know in the comments below. Hey, man, I'm a podcast listener. I appreciate that it's out there. Let people know by putting that 5-star rating or review. If you're enjoying the podcast, really does numbers, and really helps other people find the show, which is important to me, because I'm just trying to grow a community of like-minded fight fans that are trying to win, that are trying to take it serious, but are also trying to have fun with it, trying to be positive, and trying to grow the community. So I try and steer away from the toxic bullshit as much as possible, and steer into the things that are awesome about the game, like great betting opportunities, like fun fighters that are going out there to look to finish, like great title fights that we got over the weekend, one stinker and one pretty good fight. I'm always just looking forward to the next great fight on the horizon. I think we got a lot of great opportunities ahead. The final note that we'll leave you with is, if you're looking for more from me, plenty of information, navigation documents, resources starting to populate for next card, for the pay-per-views coming up, all that stuff. Already getting ahead. All that information in the description box down below on Patreon. So that's what we have for you guys today. That's the main event breakdown. I'm leaning towards the underdog or passing in this spot. I think Roman Dolidze, the Georgian, is going to get the job done here, but I think it's going to be a hell of a scrap. I think the Frenchman is going to be very competitive with him in the early going. I think there's going to be some heavy shots landed on both sides, but I think Roman Dolidze is just more dangerous in more places. So overall, I got to go with Roman Dolidze here. And I appreciate each and every one of you guys for taking the time out of your busy schedules to make some time with me. God bless you all. Enjoy those fights. And until next time, come back and we're having all the same fun again. Take care, everybody.